The storm hit threshold 7 just after sunset. Day 1 Park watched through the reinforced windows of his research outpost as purple lightning tore across the alien sky. He had been alone on this frontier planet for 8 months now, studying the local ecosystem and trying to forget why he had chosen such an isolated assignment. The wind howled like a living thing. Day 1 checked his equipment one more time and settled into his chair with a cup of synthetic coffee. The outpost was built to withstand anything this planet could throw at it. He would be safe inside until morning. Then something massive slammed against his door. The entire building shook. Alarms screamed to life. Day 1 jumped from his chair, spilling hot coffee across his desk. His heart hammered in his chest as he pulled up the security cameras on his monitor. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. A Vrath lay collapsed against his door. Even curled up in pain, the creature was enormous. Its body stretched nearly 4 meters long, covered in dark, chitinous plates that gleamed wetly in the security lights. 8 powerful limbs, each capable of crushing steel, were pulled tight against its torso. 6 amber eyes, arranged in 2 rows across its angular head, stared directly at the camera. Day 1 had seen Vrath before, but only in military footage and warning broadcasts. Everyone in human space knew what they were. Apex predators. Killers. During the contact wars, Vrath hunting packs had decimated entire colonies. They hunted other sentient species for sport. They were the monsters that parents used to scare children into obedience, and one was lying at his door. Day 1's hand moved automatically to the emergency beacon, then stopped. He looked closer at the monitor. Deep plasma burns carved through the Vrath's armor plating. 3 of its 8 limbs were bent at impossible angles, clearly shattered. Dark blood pooled beneath its body, mixing with the rain. Its breathing came in labored gasps that fogged the camera lens. This creature was dying. As Day 1 watched, the Vrath shifted slightly. It must have taken incredible effort, because its entire body shuddered with pain. But it moved deliberately, carefully, until its head was pressed flat against the ground. The posture was unmistakable, even across species. Submission. Surrender. One of its functioning limbs rose slowly and scraped against the door. Not an attack. A knock. Day 1's scientific training warred with his survival instincts. Every protocol, every safety regulation, every military advisory he had ever received told him to seal the building and call for evacuation. Vrath were not to be trusted. They were not to be approached. They were certainly not to be helped, but he could not stop staring at those 6 amber eyes. There was intelligence there, recognition, and something else. Something he had not expected to see in a creature humanity had been taught to fear above all others. The Vrath was asking for help. Day 1 pulled up his medical database with shaking hands. He had limited information on Vrath physiology. Most of it was classified military intelligence. What he did have made clear that this creature would be dead within the hour without treatment. He should let it die. His sister G1 had died in a Vrath raid 7 years ago. She had been a teacher on a colony world when a hunting pack descended from the sky. There had been no warning, no mercy, no survivors among those who were caught outside the shelters. Day 1 had spent years hating the Vrath as a species, burning with rage that had no outlet. That hatred was why he was here, alone on the edge of civilized space, trying to outrun his own emotions. The Vrath knocked again, weaker this time. Day 1 stood frozen, his hand hovering over the door controls. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to walk away. This was not his problem. This was not his responsibility. This creature represented everything he had lost. But he was a doctor, a scientist. He had taken oaths. And somewhere beneath the layers of grief and anger, he was still a person who believed that life mattered. He pressed the button. The door slid open. Rain and wind howled into the outpost. The Vrath did not move to attack. It barely moved at all. Up close, Day 1 could see just how badly it was injured. The plasma burns went deep, exposing damaged tissue beneath the armor plates. The shattered limbs were worse than he had thought. This creature had fought something terrible and lost. Daewon grabbed the cargo hauler from his equipment bay. It was designed to move heavy specimen containers, but it would have to work for a 4-meter alien predator. He maneuvered it outside, and with considerable effort, managed to get the Vroth onto the platform. The creature helped as much as it could, which was not much. It weighed easily 300 kilograms. Getting it inside and onto the medical bay table took 20 minutes of exhausting work. By the time Daewon had the Vroth positioned, he was drenched in sweat and rain. His muscles screamed in protest. But the creature was inside, and the door was sealed. Now came the hard part. Daewon's medical bay was designed for humans and the common treaty species. He had some equipment that might work on Vroth biology, but he was essentially guessing. His hands shook as he prepared sedatives, adjusting the dosage based on estimated body mass and metabolic rate. Too little, and the creature would wake up during treatment. Too much, and he would kill it. He injected the sedative into what he hoped was a major blood vessel. The Vroth's breathing slowed, but did not stop. Good enough. Working on the creature felt surreal. Its chitinous plates were harder than he expected, requiring industrial cutting tools to access the worst wounds. The plasma burns had cauterized as they cut, which had probably saved the Vroth's life but made treatment more complicated. Daewon cleaned and sealed what he could. Applied regenerative gel that might, or might not, work on alien tissue, and stabilized the broken limbs with emergency splints designed for hull breaches. Hours passed. The storm outside faded to distant thunder. Daewon's back ached, and his eyes burned with fatigue, but he kept working. Somewhere during the long night, he stopped thinking of the creature as a Vroth and started thinking of it as a patient. Dawn light was filtering through the windows when Daewon finally stepped back. He had done everything he could. Whether it would be enough, he had no idea. The creature's breathing was steadier now, and the bleeding had stopped. It might survive. Daewon collapsed into a chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. He looked at the Vroth on his medical table, this impossible being that had crawled to his door asking wordlessly for mercy. What had he done? When the Galactic Authority found out he was harboring a Vroth, there would be consequences. When other humans learned he had saved one of humanity's most feared enemies, they would call him a traitor. He might lose his research license, his position, possibly his freedom. But as Daewon sat there in the quiet morning light, watching the gentle rise and fall of the Vroth's breathing, he felt something he had not felt in 7 years. Not peace exactly, but the possibility of it. Maybe saving a life could mean as much as the ones that had been lost. The Vroth's eyes flickered open. All 6 of them focused on Daewon. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly and deliberately, the creature touched one limb to its own chest, then extended it toward Daewon. It was a gesture, a beginning. Daewon reached out and touched his hand to the offered limb. It was warm beneath his fingers, alive and real. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first 3 days were the hardest. Daewon barely slept, constantly monitoring the Vroth's vital signs and adjusting treatments. The creature drifted in and out of consciousness, its massive body fighting infections that Daewon's human medicines could only partially address. Twice, he thought he was going to lose it. Twice, the Vroth pulled through with a resilience that amazed him. Daewon started calling the creature Kale. It was a name from ancient Korean, meaning harvest. There was dark irony in naming a predator after abundance, but somehow it felt right. Kale seemed to suit this being that had come seeking help rather than taking by force. On the 4th day, Kale fully woke. Daewon was checking the regeneration gel on the plasma burns when all 6 amber eyes suddenly focused on him with complete awareness. He froze, very aware that he was within striking distance of mandibles that could tear through body armor. His heart hammered in his chest. Kale remained perfectly still. Then, slowly, the Vroth made a soft clicking sound deep in its throat. Not aggressive, almost questioning, Daewon forced himself to breathe normally. He held up his empty hands and spoke softly, even though he knew Kale probably could not understand his words. The tone was what mattered. Easy. You are safe here. I am trying to help you. Kale's eyes tracked his movements as he resumed working on the wounds. The Vroth's body remained relaxed, trusting. When Day One had to reset one of the broken limbs, which he knew must have been agonizing, Kale made no sound of protest. The creature simply gripped the edge of the medical table with its functioning limbs and endured. That night, Day One was preparing medication when his hands started shaking from exhaustion. He had been running on coffee and adrenaline for days. The measuring tool slipped from his fingers. One of Kale's limbs moved faster than Day One could track. It caught the tool gently before it hit the floor and held it steady. Day One stared in shock. The same limb that could crush steel was holding a delicate instrument with the precision of a surgeon. Kale extended the tool back to him and made that soft clicking sound again. Day One took it with trembling hands, and this time, the trembling was not from exhaustion. They were cooperating. Over the following days, a routine developed. Day One would work on Kale's injuries, and Kale would help in whatever ways its broken body allowed. The Vroth learned to hand him tools, to adjust its position for better access to wounds, to hold still during painful procedures. There was an intelligence at work that Day One had not expected, a capacity for patience and understanding that contradicted everything he thought he knew about Vroth. 2 weeks after the stormy night, Day One made a discovery that changed everything. He was reviewing the outpost's external security footage from the night Kale arrived, trying to understand what had happened. The cameras had captured more than just the Vroth's collapse. They had recorded the battle that came before it. The footage was fragmented and damaged, but Day One managed to piece together enough to understand. A civilian transport ship had crashed about 2 kilometers from his outpost during the storm. Before rescue could arrive, pirates had descended on the wreck. Day One watched in horror as the pirates prepared to breach the transport's hull, where survivors were likely sheltering. Then, Kale appeared. The Vroth fought alone against 6 attackers. Day One had never seen anything move so fast or with such controlled violence. Kale positioned itself between the pirates and the transport ship, refusing to yield ground. The pirates had plasma weapons. They poured fire into Kale, but the Vroth kept fighting. When they tried to go around, Kale cut them off. When they focused their fire to bring it down, Kale used its own body as a shield for the transport behind it. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When it ended, the pirates had retreated, and Kale stood victorious. Then the Vroth collapsed. It had dragged itself, dying and broken, across 2 kilometers of hostile terrain in a storm to reach the only shelter it knew about, Day One's outpost. The transport had been carrying families. He could see them in the footage, emerging from the wreck after Kale fell. Humans, Tekali, even 2 Vroth younglings. The creature he had been caring for had nearly died, protecting civilians of multiple species, including some that Vroth had historically hunted. Day One sat in front of his monitor for a long time, watching the footage repeat. His entire understanding of the being in his medical bay had shifted. This was not just a Vroth. This was someone who had made choices, who had decided that protecting others mattered more than survival. He went to the medical bay and found Kale awake, watching the door as if waiting for him. Day One pulled up a chair and sat where Kale could see him clearly. "I saw what you did," Day One said quietly. "The transport, the families you saved. And in Reen's," Kale's eyes focused intently on him. The Vroth made a series of soft clicking sounds, almost like it was trying to communicate. Frustrated by the lack of response, Kale looked around the medical bay. Its eyes settled on a tray of surgical tools. What happened next amazed Day One. Kale carefully picked up several small instruments and began arranging them on the table in a specific pattern. Not random, deliberate. Day One watched as the pattern formed into something recognizable. His heart began to race. This was communication. Basic, primitive, but undeniably intentional. Kale was trying to talk to him. Daewon grabbed his datapad and pulled up a simple visual interface. He showed Kyle basic shapes, colors, and symbols. The Vrath studied them with obvious interest, then began touching certain symbols in sequence. It took hours of patient work, but gradually they developed a simple system. Yes and no. Pain or comfort. Danger or safety. It was like teaching a child, except the child was a massive alien predator with intelligence that might rival his own. Over the next week, their communication grew more sophisticated. Daewon brought colored stones from his geological samples. Kale arranged them into increasingly complex patterns. The Vrath learned to use light indicators on the medical equipment, creating sequences that conveyed meaning. When Daewon introduced his computer terminal, Kyle took to it immediately, powerful limbs tapping keys with surprising gentleness. Slowly, painfully, a story emerged. A story that made Daewon's chest tight with emotion. Kale had once been like other Vrath, a warrior in a culture built on violence and hunting. But 30 cycles ago, during a raid on a human colony, Kale encountered a human child who had been separated from the evacuation. The girl was small, terrified, crying for her mother. Standard Vrath procedure would have been to kill her quickly. Kale did not kill her. Instead, the Vrath protected the child for 6 days while searching for her people. It fought off scavengers, found her food, kept her safe. When rescue finally came, Kale could have killed the rescuers easily. Instead, it left the child, where she would be found, and disappeared into the wilderness. That single act of mercy changed everything. Kale became an outcast among its own kind, marked as weak, as broken. Other Vrath hunted it as a traitor. But the galactic community did not welcome it either. To them, Kale was still a Vrath, still a monster wearing a different mask. So Kale lived in the shadows, moving between worlds, trying to make up for past violence by protecting those it could. Always alone, always hunted, always seeking redemption that might never come. Daewon found himself sharing his own story in return. He told Kale about Ji-Won, his sister, who died in a Vrath raid. He explained how the loss had consumed him, how he had fled to this isolated outpost to escape the hatred eating him alive. He admitted that his first instinct had been to leave Kale outside, to die. But I did not, Daewon said softly. I am glad I did not. Kale's response through the computer was simple but profound. First mercy in long time. We'll remember. Something shifted in Daewon's chest. Not forgiveness exactly. The pain of losing J1 would never fully heal. But perhaps there was room for something else alongside the grief. Understanding. Understanding. The recognition that individuals could transcend the worst aspects of their species, that beings could change. Late that night, Daewon was startled awake by alarms. His computer terminal flashed warnings. An incoming message from Galactic Authority. They had detected unauthorized biological signatures at his outpost and were dispatching an inspection team. They would arrive in 3 days. Kale was still healing, barely mobile. There was nowhere to hide a 4-meter Vrath. If the inspectors found Kale here, there would be consequences for both of them. Daewon looked at Kale, who had pulled itself up despite obvious pain. The Vrath's eyes were alert, intelligent, aware of the danger. Through the computer, Kale typed slowly, "Should leave. Will not risk you." Daewon surprised himself by laughing. It was a bitter sound. "No. You stayed to protect others. I will stay to protect you." Then the proximity alarms went off. Something was entering the system. Something big. Daewon pulled up the sensor readings and felt his blood run cold. It was not the Galactic Authority. It was a Vrath warpack. 6 ships strong, and they were broadcasting a single message, repeating over and over in Vrath battle cant. They had come for Kale. The Vrath warpack would reach the outpost in less than 6 hours. Daewon stared at his monitors. watching 6 attack ships cut through space toward Threshold 7, like predators closing in on wounded prey. His mind raced through options, calculations, desperate plans. None of them ended well. KL had pulled itself to a sitting position despite the obvious pain. The Vroth's healing had progressed remarkably over the past weeks, but it was still far from combat ready. 3 limbs remained splinted, and the plasma burns were still regenerating tissue. Against 6 healthy Vroth warriors, Kael would not stand a chance. Through the computer interface they had developed, Kael typed slowly. "They come for me. I am marked traitor. You must contact authority. Tell them you held me prisoner. They will believe you." Day One felt anger flare in his chest. "No. I will not lie about what you are. You saved those families. You chose mercy over violence. That matters. To you, perhaps. To my kind, mercy is weakness. To your kind, I am still monster." Day One wanted to argue, but he knew there was truth in Kael's words. The galaxy was not ready to accept a Vroth who had chosen peace. Maybe it never would be, but that did not mean they should stop trying. He pulled up a chair and sat facing Kael. The outpost's defenses would hold for a while, but not forever. They had perhaps a few hours before the attack began. Time enough, maybe, to understand what they were really fighting for. "Tell me," Day One said. "Tell me everything. Why you changed. What happened after you saved that human child? I want to know who you really are." Kael's eyes studied him for a long moment. Then, the Vroth began to type, and a story emerged that broke Day One's heart. The child's name had been Hei-Wan. She was 8 years old when the raid came to her colony. Kael had been part of the hunting pack, young and eager to prove itself in battle. But when Kael found the girl hiding in rubble, something had shifted inside its mind. The child was not fighting back. She was not a warrior or a threat. She was just small and scared and crying. For the first time in its life, Kael questioned what it had been taught. The voice of its pack leaders in its head said to kill quickly and move on. But another voice, quieter and deeper, asked a different question. What honor was there in killing something so helpless? Kael made a choice in that moment that would define everything that came after. It hid the child from the other hunters. When they moved to the next zone, Kael stayed behind. For 6 days, it protected Hei-Wan, hunting food for her, keeping her warm, fending off the scavengers that moved through abandoned colonies. The child had been terrified at first, but children adapt in ways adults cannot. By the 3rd day, Hei-Wan was talking to Kael, telling it about her parents, her school, her friends. She did not understand that Kael's species had killed those friends. She only knew that this strange creature was keeping her safe. When human rescue teams finally arrived, Kael made sure the child was found. Then it disappeared. It could never return to its pack. What it had done was unthinkable in Vroth culture. Warriors did not show mercy. They did not protect prey. They certainly did not bond with humans. Kael became hunted by its own kind. Pack after pack came for it, seeking to eliminate the weakness it represented. But Kael had always been a strong fighter. And now it fought for something beyond glory or status. It fought to survive so it could protect others. Over 30 cycles, Kael moved through the shadows of the galaxy. It worked as an anonymous guard, protecting convoys and settlements without revealing its identity. It intervened in pirate attacks, saved stranded travelers, and stopped violence wherever it could. Always hidden. Always alone. Other species feared it on sight. Humans especially. Kael could not blame them. It carried the face and form of their nightmares. No matter how many lives it saved, one look at its chitinous armor and multiple limbs was enough to trigger panic and gunfire. The loneliness had been crushing. Kael typed the words slowly, and Day One felt the weight of them. 30 cycles without hearing my name, without touch of kin, without home. Sometimes wondered if would have been better to die with honor than live with shame. But you kept going, Day One said quietly. Yes. Because little Hay One asked me question. Last thing she said before rescue came. She asked, "Why did you save me?" I had no answer then. Took many cycles to understand. I saved her because I could. Because choosing life over death is what makes us more than animals. Day One felt his throat tighten. He thought about his sister G1, about the Vrath who had killed her. Had any of them questioned their orders? Had any of them hesitated, or were they all like KL once was, following the culture of violence without thought? He would never know. But sitting here with KL, watching this massive being type out confessions of loneliness and doubt, Day One realized something profound. Individuals were not their species. KL had been born into violence but chose mercy. G1 had been gentle her whole life, but was taken by brutality. The universe was not fair, and species-wide judgments solved nothing. I came to this outpost to escape, Day One admitted. After my sister died, I could not be around other people. They wanted to comfort me, to help me move on. But I was drowning in anger. I hated all Vrath for what a few had done. I hated myself for that hatred. So I came here, to the edge of everything, hoping distance would make the pain smaller. Did it work? Kyle typed. No, pain does not get smaller. You just get stronger at carrying it. Day One smiled sadly. But saving you, learning your story, that has given me something I did not expect. Not forgiveness. I do not think I can forgive what happened to G1. But understanding, maybe. The knowledge that change is possible, even for species as different as ours. Kale's response took a long time to type. You gave mercy when had every reason not to. Open door when should have let me die. Why? Day One thought about that question. He had asked himself the same thing 100 times since that stormy night. Why had he opened the door? Why had he risked everything for a being he had been taught to fear? Because I saw your eyes, he said finally. And I saw someone asking for help. Not demanding, not taking, asking. That took more courage than I had ever shown. If you could be brave enough to ask, I could be brave enough to answer. The computer screen stayed blank for a moment. Then Kale typed simply, "Thank you." The moment was interrupted by another alarm. The Vrath warpack had entered orbit. Day One pulled up the external cameras and watched as 6 sleek ships took up positions around his outpost. They were not subtle about their intentions. These were military vessels, armed and armored for assault. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The voice that spoke was harsh and grating. Vrath battle can't, translated through automated systems into human language. Outcast, traitor, broken thing that shames its blood. We have tracked you across 30 cycles. We have followed your trail of weakness. Now we end your dishonor. Come out and face judgment, or we will burn the structure and the human who harbors you. Kale began typing frantically. Must go out. Cannot let them harm you. No. Day One pulled up the outpost's defense systems. They were designed to withstand environmental hazards and wildlife, not military assault. But they would have to be enough. You chose life over death. I choose the same. We stand together. A. S. We'll D together, Kale typed. Maybe. But if we do, it will be because we tried to be better than what the galaxy expects us to be. That has to count for something. Day One activated the outpost's shields and defensive weapons. They powered up with a hum that vibrated through the floor. The systems were old but well-maintained. They would hold for a while. How long? He did not know. KL pulled itself fully upright, despite the pain. The Vrath began removing its splints with careful efficiency. Day One started to protest, but KL silenced him with a gesture. Through the computer, words appeared, on screen. If fight comes, fight proper. You saved my life. I protect yours. This is balance. This is honor. Day 1 checked the weapons locker. Plasma rifles, electromagnetic barriers, emergency response gear. None of it was military grade. But beggars could not be choosers. He started pulling out everything that might be useful. Outside, the Vroth ships began their descent. They came in combat formation, weapons hot, broadcasting their intentions. This was not just about Kale. This was a statement, a message to any other Vroth who might consider straying from their violent culture. Change would not be tolerated. But as Day 1 prepared for the siege, loading weapons and checking defensive positions, he felt something unexpected. Not fear, though that was present too. Not resignation. What he felt was determination. KL had spent 30 cycles alone, fighting for a better way, with no one to support it. But KL was not alone anymore. They would face this together, human and Vroth, proving that cooperation was possible even between species that had been enemies. The first plasma bolt struck the shields. The battle had begun. But somewhere in the back of Day 1's mind, a small hope flickered. The emergency beacon he had activated was still broadcasting. Help might come. It might not arrive in time, but it might come. And if it did, they would have one hell of a story to tell. The first wave hit the outpost like a hammer. Plasma fire screamed against the shields, turning the air outside into a hellish light show. Day 1 gripped his rifle and watched the monitors as 6 Vroth warriors descended from their ships, moving with the terrifying grace of apex predators. They spread out around the outpost in a classic attack pattern. 2 moved to flank the east side, 2 took the west, and 2 remained at the main entrance. The leader was obvious even through the grainy camera feed. Larger than the others, its armor covered in battle scars. This Vroth moved with absolute confidence. This was a creature that had never known defeat. Tal, Kale typed quickly on the terminal. Pack leader. Fought beside him once. He is dangerous. Very dangerous. Day 1 watched Tal gesture to the other warriors. They began probing the shields, looking for weak points. The outpost's defenses were automated, tracking and responding to threats. But they were designed for wildlife and environmental hazards. Against trained military combatants, they would not last long. How long can the shields hold? Kale typed. Maybe an hour. 2, if we are lucky. Day 1 pulled up the internal defense systems. But we have advantages. They have to come inside eventually, and I know every room, every corridor, every system in this building. We can make them pay for every meter. Kale made a low clicking sound that Day 1 had learned meant agreement. The Vroth moved to the weapons locker and examined the equipment with obvious familiarity. Despite its injuries, Kale handled the plasma rifle with expert efficiency, checking the charge and sighting systems. The shields flared again as concentrated fire hit the eastern section. Warning lights blazed across Day 1's console. The eastern shield generator was at 60% and dropping fast. They were testing his defenses methodically, professionally. They are trying to overwhelm one section, Day 1 said. Force us to reinforce it and create weakness elsewhere. Kale typed rapidly. Standard pack tactics. Tal taught me this. Attack obvious target while real assault comes from unexpected angle. So where is the real assault? Before Kyle could answer, alarms shrieked from the southern section. Day 1 spun to check the monitors and cursed. 2 Vroth had circled around while he was focused on the eastern attack. They were now placing charges on the southern wall, targeting the shield generator directly. Clever, brutal, effective. Going to blow the generator, Kale typed. When shield falls, they rush in. Day 1's mind raced. He pulled up the environmental controls and made a decision. Can Vroth breathe nitrogen? Can Vroth breathe nitrogen? Yes, but oxygen is better. Why? Day 1's fingers flew across the keyboard. Because I am betting they did not bring breathing equipment for an assault they expected to be quick. He triggered the environmental system override. The outpost's southern section began flooding with pure nitrogen, displacing the oxygen-rich atmosphere. On the monitors, he watched the two Vrath warriors suddenly stumble. They were not suffocating, but their efficiency dropped dramatically. Movements became sluggish. Coordination suffered. Smart, Kale typed. But Tal will adapt. He always adapts. Sure enough, the assault pattern changed. The warriors pulled back from the southern wall, regrouping at the main entrance. Tal seemed to be giving orders, his massive form gesturing at the building. Then all 6 Vrath focused their fire on a single point at the main entrance. The shield there began failing rapidly. "They are coming in," Day One said, checking his rifle charge. "Whatever happens, we hold the medical bay. It has reinforced walls, and only one entrance. We can bottleneck them." KL moved toward the door, then hesitated. The Vrath turned its 6 eyes to Day One. "If capture me, let them. You can say, I forced you, held you prisoner. They will spare you, if believe you are victim. No." Day One's voice was firm. "We talked about this. I will not abandon you now." The main shield generator exploded in a shower of sparks. Alarms screamed throughout the outpost. The entrance was exposed. Day One activated the internal defense turrets and locked down every door between the entrance and the medical bay. It would not stop the Vrath, but it would slow them down. The first warrior through the door took a plasma bolt from a turret directly to the chest. The impact sent it sprawling backward. Not dead, the armor absorbed most of the damage, but wounded and out of the fight. 5 left, but the Vrath learned fast. The second warrior came through low and fast, using the walls for cover. It disabled the turret with 2 precise shots before Day One could react. The others poured in behind it, spreading through the outpost with terrifying efficiency. Day One sealed the medical bay door and activated the emergency locks. Through the cameras, he watched the Vrath move through his home, searching room by room. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, covering each other perfectly. This was what pack hunters looked like when they were serious. Tal's voice boomed through the outpost's speakers. The translation was harsh but clear. "Human, you harbor a traitor to our kind. Give it to us, and you live. Refuse, and you die. There is no third option." Day One did not bother responding. Instead, he pulled up the laboratory section controls. He had been studying Threshold 7's ecosystem for months. He knew which of the native species were territorial, which were aggressive, which ones really did not like being disturbed. He opened the specimen containment units. Through the monitors, he watched chaos erupt. A pack of razorbacks, 6-legged predators covered in quills, burst from their enclosure and immediately attacked the nearest Vrath warrior. The warrior fought back efficiently, but the razorbacks were fast and angry. More containment units opened. Acid spitters, tunnel crawlers, everything Day One had been studying. All of them now loose and hostile. The Vrath were forced to split their attention. 2 stayed focused on reaching the medical bay. 3 dealt with the wildlife. Tal, the leader, simply smashed through everything in his path, heading straight for Day One's position. "He is coming," Kale typed. The Vrath positioned itself between Day One and the door, plasma rifle ready despite its injuries. The medical bay door began to glow. They were cutting through with plasma torches. Day One raised his rifle, aiming at where he knew the door would fail. Beside him, Kyle was absolutely still, focused, waiting. The door exploded inward. 2 Vrath warriors charged through the gap. Kale fired first, controlled bursts that forced them to take cover. Day One added his fire, targeting the ceiling above them. Pipes burst, spraying coolant. The warriors retreated, temporarily blinded. But Tal came through next, and he did not retreat. The massive Vrath took 3 direct hits and kept coming. His plasma rifle swept the room, forcing both Day One and Kyle to dive for cover. A bolt passed so close to Day One's head that he felt the heat of it. Kale roared, a sound Day One had never heard before. Pure challenge. Warrior to warrior. The two Vroth faced each other across the medical bay, weapons lowered. This was personal now. Tal spoke in Vroth battle cant. The translation came through broken and harsh. You were my student, my best warrior. You brought shame to us all. Why? For what? For these weak prey species, who would exterminate us if they could. Kale's response came through the room's speakers, typed frantically and translated. Because killing the helpless is not strength. Because mercy is harder than violence. Because I choose to be more than what we were born to be. Then you die as a traitor. Tal said. He attacked. Day One had never seen anything move so fast. Tal covered the distance to Kale in a heartbeat, all 8 limbs working in perfect coordination. Kale met the assault with equal ferocity, but it was still recovering from its injuries. The fight was brutal, fast, and one-sided. Day One tried to help, firing at Tal, but the leader's armor deflected the shots. Then, Tal's tail whipped around and knocked Day One across the room. He hit the wall hard, his rifle clattering away. Pain exploded through his shoulder. Kale saw him fall and made a mistake. The Vroth's attention shifted for just a moment, concerned for the human. Tal took advantage instantly. His plasma lance drove through Kale's side, burning deep. Kale went down with a scream that made Day One's blood run cold. Tal stood over Kale, weapon raised for the killing blow. You betrayed everything. Die knowing you failed. Day One's hand found something on the floor. A medical laser, used for precise surgery. Not a weapon, but it was all he had. He raised it with his good arm and fired directly into Tal's eyes. The Vroth leader roared in pain and rage, spinning toward Day One. The distraction was enough. Kyle surged upward despite its wounds and locked all of its limbs around Tal, dragging the larger Vroth down. They crashed into the medical equipment, locked in desperate combat. Day One crawled toward his rifle, his vision blurring from pain. He had to help Kale. He had to do something. But his body was not cooperating. The world was getting fuzzy around the edges. Then new alarms blared. Not outpost alarms. Ship alarms. Something massive had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above them. Tal and the other Vroth warriors froze, clearly receiving transmissions Day One could not hear. Through the hole in the medical bay door, Day One could see his external monitors. A human military vessel hung in orbit, massive and bristling with weapons. Its identification signal blazed across his screens. The ship was named Time's Steadfast Asterisk, and its captain was transmitting on all frequencies. Her voice young but carrying absolute authority. This is Captain Hae-won Kim of the Earth Defense Force. Stand down immediately or be destroyed. You have 10 seconds to comply. Kale's 6 eyes went wide. Through the room's damaged speakers, a translated whisper. The child. Little Hae-won. She came. Everything stopped. The Vroth warriors stood frozen, weapons lowered. Tal released Kale and stepped back, his posture radiating confusion and calculation. The tables had turned completely. Above them, human Marines were already descending. The siege was over, but the real confrontation was just beginning. The human Marines came through the outpost like a storm of organized efficiency. 20 soldiers in full combat armor swept through each room, securing the Vroth warriors with electromagnetic restraints designed specifically for their species. The warriors did not resist. Tal stood silent as they bound his limbs, his scarred face unreadable. Day One sat against the wall of the medical bay, his shoulder screaming with pain. A Marine medic was already working on him, applying field dressings and injecting something that made the world softer around the edges. Through the haze, he watched more medics tend to Kale, who had collapsed after Tal released him. The plasma wound in Kale's side was serious, possibly fatal. Then she walked in, and Day One understood everything. Captain Hae-won Kim was not what he expected. She was young, maybe late 20s, with sharp eyes and an air of absolute command. She wore her captain's uniform like armor, every movement precise and purposeful. But when her eyes fell on Kale's massive form lying on the medical table, her professional mask cracked. For a moment, she was 8 years old again, small and terrified and crying for her mother. For a moment, she remembered 6 days of being carried gently in massive limbs, of being kept warm against chitinous armor, of clicking sounds that seemed to say everything would be okay. "It is really you," she whispered. Kale's eyes focused on her with obvious effort. The Vroth made a soft clicking sound, the same one Day One had learned meant recognition and comfort. One limb extended slowly toward Hay-One, trembling with weakness. She crossed the distance in 3 quick steps and touched her hand to the offered limb. Tears ran down her face, and she did not bother to hide them. "You saved me. You gave up everything to save one stupid little girl who was too scared to run when the alarm sounded." Second, quote, through the room's damaged speakers, Kale's translated words came slowly. "Not stupid. Brave. You survived. That is what mattered." Tal watched this exchange with what might have been confusion or might have been disgust. The massive Vroth leader spoke, and the translation came harsh. "This is what you betrayed us for? Sentiment? Attachment to prey?" Hay-One turned to face him, and Day One saw steel in her expression. This was not a child anymore. This was a military officer who had earned her rank through skill and determination. That prey grew up to command a destroyer. That sentiment made me strong enough to survive 30 years of nightmares about your kind. And that attachment is why you are going to trial, instead of being vaporized from orbit. "You should kill us," Tal said. "It is what we would do." "Yes," Hay-One agreed. "It is exactly what you would do. Which is why you are not us." "Why?" She turned to her second officer, a hard-faced woman with Marine insignia. "Secure the prisoners. I want them transported to the Times, steadfast Times, and held in isolation. Medical treatment for injuries, but full restraints. No communication between them until we reach the tribunal station." The Marines moved efficiently, escorting the Vrath warriors out one by one. Tal went last, his eyes fixed on Kale until the very end. What passed between them, Day One could not say. Understanding, perhaps, or merely acknowledgement that their paths had diverged permanently. When they were gone, Hay-One finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She pulled up a chair and sat between Day One and Kale's medical table. "Someone want to tell me how a xenobiologist ended up harboring a Vrath outcast and fighting off a warpack with specimen containers and nitrogen?" Despite the pain, Day One smiled. "It is a long story. I have time," so they told her. Day One explained how Kale had arrived during the storm, wounded and dying, asking without words for help. He described the decision to open the door. The weeks of healing, the slow development of communication and trust. Kale contributed through the computer terminal, adding details about the transport ship, the families it had protected, the 30 cycles of lonely wandering. Hay-One listened to all of it without interruption. When they finished, she sat quietly for a moment, processing. "The Galactic Authority is going to have a field day with this. A human saving a Vrath protecting multiple species. It contradicts every narrative they have been pushing since the Contact Wars. What will happen to KL?" Day One asked. The question had been eating at him since the moment the Times' steadfast Times arrived. "Honestly, I do not know. There are factions that will want KL executed as a war criminal. Others will want to study it, use it as proof that Vrath can be rehabilitated. Some will just want the whole situation to disappear quietly." Hay-One looked at Kyle with obvious concern. "But I have some influence." No. And I will use all of it. What you did for me, what you gave up, I can never repay that. But I can try." Over the next several days, As Day One recovered in the Times Steadfast's Times medical bay and Kale stabilized from its injuries, Day One worked tirelessly. She filed reports, gave testimony, called in favors from every officer and politician she had connections with. She told Kale's story to anyone who would listen, and her rank and reputation gave her access to people who mattered. The debate that followed was fierce. Day One watched from his hospital bed as news feeds exploded with the story. Some called him a hero. Others called him a traitor to his species. Some saw Kale as proof that change was possible. Others saw only a predator waiting for an opportunity to strike. The turning point came when Day One released the footage from Kale's armor, showing the battle to protect the transport ship. Seeing a Vroth take plasma fire to shield civilians of multiple species, including Vroth younglings, from pirates changed the conversation. It was impossible to watch that footage and claim Kale was motivated by anything except genuine desire to protect. A proposal emerged from the chaos. Instead of execution or imprisonment, Kale would become part of a new initiative called the Threshold Program. Named after Day One's outpost, the program would bring together former enemies to work on cooperation and mutual understanding. It would be experimental, controversial, and possibly doomed to fail. But it was a chance. Day One was offered the director position. He accepted immediately. 3 months later, they stood together on the rebuilt outpost. The damage from the siege had been repaired, and the facility expanded significantly. New buildings dotted the landscape, designed to accommodate multiple species with different environmental needs. The first group of participants was arriving today. Kale stood beside Day One, fully healed now, its armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. The Vroth had regained full mobility, though it still moved carefully around the smaller humans who worked at the facility. Trust was a fragile thing, earned slowly. "Are you nervous?" Day One asked. Kale's response through the portable translator it now carried was immediate. "Terrified. What if they cannot see past what I am? What if I fail them? Then we try again. That is what this place is for. Second chances. Third chances. As many chances as it takes." The transport ship landed, and the passengers began emerging. Humans, Tekali, Volvari, and yes, even 3 young Vroth, who had volunteered for the program. They looked around uncertainly, clearly as nervous as Kale. Day One was there too, having taken leave from her duties to help with the initial setup. She stood on Day One's other side, watching the arrivals with a slight smile. "You know this might not work. The galaxy is not ready for what you are trying to do here." "Maybe not," Day One agreed. "But it will never be ready if no one tries. Kyle tried 30 cycles ago when it saved you. I tried when I opened my door. Now, we try together." Among the new arrivals, Day One spotted a Vroth youngling standing apart from the others, clearly uncertain. The small creature's armor was unmarked, indicating it had never seen combat. It looked around nervously, probably expecting hostility. Kale noticed too. The large Vroth moved slowly toward the youngling, careful not to appear threatening. When it reached the smaller one, Kale lowered its head in the same gesture of peace it had made to Day One so many months ago. The youngling hesitated, then returned the gesture. They clicked softly to each other in Vroth language, and though Day One could not understand the words, he understood the meaning. Recognition, acceptance, hope. A human child, maybe 6 years old, separated from her parents, and approached the 2 Vroth with the fearless curiosity only children possess. She looked up at Kale's massive form and asked simply, "Are you nice?" Kale looked to Day One, clearly uncertain how to respond. Day One nodded encouragement. The Vroth turned back to the child and extended one limb very gently. The girl touched it without hesitation, smiled, and then ran back to her parents. Such a small moment, such a fragile connection. But Day One felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was what they were building. Not the erasure of the past, but the possibility of a different future. Not forgetting the violence and loss, but choosing not to let it define everything. That evening, After the arrivals had settled into their quarters and the facility had quieted, Day 1 and KL walked to the outpost's observation deck. They stood looking at the alien stars, two beings who should have been enemies but had become something else. Not just friends, though they were that. Something more profound. Proof that choice mattered more than biology, that individuals could transcend the worst aspects of their cultures. "Do you think Tal understood?" Day 1 asked. "Before they took him away. Do you think he saw why you changed?" Kale was quiet for a long moment. "No. But perhaps someday. If this place succeeds, if we show that mercy is strength and cooperation is possible, then maybe others like Tal will question what they have been taught. Change is slow, but it is possible. I am proof of that." "We are proof of that," Day 1 corrected. "You asked for help without words." I answered. "Hay-One came when we needed her. Now others are here, willing to try. None of us did this alone." Kale's limb settled gently on Day 1's shoulder, a gesture they had developed as their own form of connection. "Thank you. For opening your door. For seeing me when others saw only monster. For giving me something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" "Home." Day 1 smiled, feeling the weight of everything they had been through and everything they might accomplish. The work ahead would be difficult. There would be setbacks, failures, people who refused to change their minds. But they would face it together. In the distance, through the observation deck's windows, Day 1 could see the lights of the new buildings. Humans and Vrath working side by side on repairs. Tekali and Volvari sharing a meal. Small moments of cooperation that would have been impossible a year ago. And in one of the residential buildings, he saw something that made his heart full. A Vrath youngling and a human child, playing some game that involved lots of running and clicking and laughter. Just children being children, the species barrier meaningless to them. Maybe Hay-One was right. Maybe the galaxy was not ready for what they were building here. But children understood what adults had forgotten. That people were people, regardless of how many limbs they had or what planet they came from. That kindness mattered more than fear. That a wounded predator, asking for help, deserved the same mercy as anyone else. Day 1 thought about G1, his sister who had died so violently. He thought about the anger that had consumed him, the isolation he had chosen, the hatred that had nearly destroyed him from the inside. He could not change what had happened to her. But he could choose what to build in her memory, not a monument to vengeance, not a fortress of isolation, but a place where wounds could heal, where enemies could become allies, where the lost could find home. He looked at KL, this being who had crawled to his door in a storm, asking without words for something impossible. Help. Trust. A chance. And Day 1 had answered. That single choice, made in a moment of compassion over fear, had changed everything. For both of them. For Hay-One. For everyone who would come to this place, seeking their own second chance. The stars above Threshold 7 shone bright and eternal. The work ahead was daunting, but Day 1 was not afraid anymore. He had learned something from Kale, something profound and true. Mercy was not weakness, change was not impossible. And sometimes, the bravest thing you could do was open your door to someone who needed help, even if every instinct screamed at you to walk away, especially then, because that was when it mattered most.